Tonight, we follow a trail that runs deeper than knights and castles, deeper than cathedrals and crowns, a hidden current that began on the stones of Solomon's temple and still pulses through symbols we pass every day. For centuries, the Templars were said to be guardians of treasure, but what they carried was far stranger than gold. Beneath the Temple Mount, they dug not for coins but for blueprints, codes, and rites that promised a power older than kingdoms. When they fell in fire on a Friday the 13th, their secrets did not die. They slipped into lodges, into handshakes, and whispered words. The Freemasons rose from that silence, turning stone into ritual, cities into temples, and geometry into a sacred language. This isn't about relics lost in the sand. It's about a process that survived in symbols, oaths, and designs that still shape our world. A cult of knowledge hidden in plain sight, too dangerous to destroy, too powerful to reveal. So before you think you know the story of Knights and Masons, ask yourself, what if the temple never vanished at all? Like the video, subscribe, because tonight we open the gates of the Solomonic cult, and some secrets were never meant to rest. What if the Temple of Solomon never died? What if its breath still lingers in the walls of cathedrals, in the rituals of secret brotherhoods, in the very cities we walk every day without noticing? Picture a temple that was said to hold the presence of God itself, a place where heaven and earth touched through stone, wood, and gold. The ark rested there, the priests whispered the sacred name, and kings came to kneel beneath pillars that were not just stone but symbols. That temple was torn down, rebuilt, and finally lost, or so the story goes. But what if the truth is more complicated? What if it never vanished at all, but instead migrated, carried not by armies but by oaths, hidden in geometry, in numbers, in passwords? Close your eyes for a moment and imagine you are walking through the streets of medieval Europe. The bells of cathedrals ring, stonemasons climb scaffolds, carving arches so high they seem to scrape the sky. You feel the weight of centuries in the cobblestones beneath your feet. But hidden in those arches, in those windows, are ratios first whispered in Jerusalem, a kind of secret code passed quietly from generation to generation, the Solomonic code. It is not written in words. It is written in stone, in light, in silence. Think of the knights who rode east in the 12th century. The Crusades were supposed to be about Holy Land, but what if they were about holy knowledge? In the year 1119, 9 knights camped on the ruins of Solomon's temple. They called themselves the poor fellow soldiers of Christ, but many believe they were digging beneath the stones, searching not for relics of gold, but for something older, measurements, scrolls, plans. And when they returned to Europe, they built cathedrals that looked less like churches and more like echoes of the temple. Centuries later, whispers tell of another brotherhood, the Freemasons, men in aprons, gathering in candlelit lodges, reciting plays about Solomon, Hiram the builder, and the temple lost to time. Was it just allegory, or were they acting out a memory disguised as ritual? Every grip, every symbol, every line drawn with compass and square pointed back to a place no longer standing but still alive in them. The temple had become portable, no longer fixed in Jerusalem, but beating inside human hearts, etched into their secret oaths. You might think it is only myth, but look closer. Why do so many of the greatest buildings in Europe and beyond carry the same geometric patterns? Why are twin pillars carved again and again, from Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland to the Capitol in Washington? Why do cities align with stars? Why do maps hide ratios? Why do symbols of builders keep returning like a ghost you cannot banish? Maybe because the temple is not gone. Maybe because it never was. So the question is not whether Solomon's temple still stands. Stones crumble, walls fall. The question is whether its heartbeat still moves through us. In cathedrals, in lodges, in codes carved into monuments we pass without seeing, what if the temple still breathes, not as ruins in the desert, but as a secret, alive in plain sight, waiting for you to notice? In the heart of ancient Jerusalem rose a structure that was said to be unlike anything the world had ever seen. It was called the House of the Lord, but to those who entered it, it was more than a house. It was a map of the cosmos, a machine of stone and gold designed to draw heaven down to earth. Built during the reign of King Solomon, around the 10th century before Christ, the first temple shimmered with cedar wood from Lebanon, gold that coated its walls and altars, and carvings of palm trees, cherubim, and flowers that turned architecture into living scripture. To step inside was to step into a place where the boundary between the human and the divine grew thin. At the center of this holy place stood the Ark of the Covenant, a chest of acacia wood covered in pure gold. It held the tablets of Moses, the rod of Aaron, and a jar of manna, relics that were more than history. They were believed to be vessels of presence. When priests carried the ark into the inner chamber, the Holy of Holies, the room filled with the Shekinah, a luminous cloud said to be the very breath of God. Only the high priest could enter that chamber. And only once a year, on the Day of Atonement, because the presence within was too powerful for ordinary eyes. But while most remember the ark and the fire that filled the sanctuary, there were other symbols just as important, symbols that still echo today. At the entrance of the temple stood two massive bronze pillars. Their names were Boaz and Jachin. To the casual eye they might have looked like decoration, but in the world of symbols they were keys. Boaz, meaning strength, and Jachin, meaning he will establish, stood like guardians at the threshold. They represented stability, balance, the meeting of opposites. To pass between them was to cross from the ordinary into the sacred, from the visible world into the hidden one. These pillars were not just stone, they were geometry. Ancient builders believed that numbers and shapes were divine language. The height and width of the pillars, their placement in relation to the temple walls, even the way light struck them during certain times of the year, carried meaning. Together they formed a kind of code, a blueprint that whispered of balance between earth and heaven, male and female, matter and spirit. Later, centuries later, these same symbols would appear in lodges, etched into tracing boards, carried in ritual dramas that seemed to repeat the story of Solomon's temple over and over again. Imagine the effect of entering this place in its prime. Gold gleaming in firelight, smoke rising from the altar, music of cymbals and harps echoing through the courts. Priests in white robes moving with measured steps as if rehearsing a cosmic play. Every angle, every wall, every vessel was intentional. It was not just a building. It was a statement that heaven could dwell on earth, that the divine could live among men. The temple was both symbol and reality, a space where geometry became theology, where wood and stone carried mysteries still unfolding today. And though the Babylonians destroyed it in the year 586 before Christ, its memory refused to die, because the blueprint remained, etched into scripture, into myth, into ritual. Boaz and Jachin may have fallen, but their shadow still stands wherever secret orders gather, wherever architects trace lines on parchment, wherever symbols wait quietly to be noticed. There is a story told in whispers among builders and initiates, a story that has no place in ordinary history books, yet has shaped the soul of secret orders for centuries. It is the tale of Hiram Abiff, the master architect of Solomon's temple. According to legend, Hiram was not just a craftsman but a keeper of knowledge, entrusted with sacred geometry and the divine word that gave meaning to creation itself. His role was not merely to build, but to guard a mystery, a word of power that only he, Solomon, and a select few were allowed to know. This word, it was said, held the essence of the divine, a key to wisdom and authority. But in the myth, not everyone was patient enough to wait. 3 lesser craftsmen, sometimes called ruffians, demanded the word from Hiram, believing it would grant them mastery and status. They confronted him, each at a different gate of the temple. First one struck him when he refused, then another, and finally the third delivered the fatal blow. Hiram collapsed, bleeding into the very ground where the temple rose, his lips sealed, and the sacred word lost with him. His body was buried in secret, and his murder became more than tragedy. It became drama, a symbolic death that would be replayed for centuries in the rituals of those who claimed descent from the builders. Why would such a grim tale endure? Because, in the language of myth, Hiram's death was not an ending but a teaching. The word he refused to reveal symbolized integrity, the refusal to betray sacred trust even under threat. His silence was a covenant. His fall became a model of loyalty, sacrifice, and the cost of keeping secrets. For those who built cathedrals, and later for Freemasons in their lodges, Hiram was not a character from history, but an eternal archetype, the martyr of craft and truth. The story did not stop at the grave. In the rituals that grew from it, the initiate is asked to step into Hiram's place, to die symbolically, to fall as the master fell. But then comes the raising, a moment where a brother extends his hand and lifts the fallen back to light. It is not just a play, it is a rehearsal of death and resurrection, a reminder that even when words are lost, meaning can be reborn. In this way, Hiram's silence becomes not despair but promise. The true word may be hidden, but it waits to be found again. Think about what this encodes. A building is never just stone, a craft is never just skill. It carries ethics, loyalty, sacrifice. Hiram's story is a code disguised as a myth. It tells initiates that mastery is not gained by theft or violence, but by patience, discipline, and trust. It tells them that secrets matter because they are not possessions, but responsibilities. And most haunting of all, it tells them that some knowledge can only be regained through loss, that the word once buried must be searched for in silence, in symbols, in the very act of building. So the next time you see a cornerstone marked with strange signs or hear mention of the lost word, remember the murdered master. Remember Hiram Abiff, whose death at the temple gates became the heartbeat of initiation, a story that refuses to fade because it still whispers that truth, once lost, must be raised again. In the year 1119, 9 knights rode into Jerusalem and made a vow that would change history. They called themselves the poor fellow soldiers of Christ, but the world would come to know them as the Knights Templar. Their mission, at least in public, was simple. They were sworn to protect pilgrims travelling the dangerous roads of the Holy Land, but their choice of headquarters raised questions that still echo today. They did not set up camp in a fortress or a palace. Instead, they took residence on the very grounds of Solomon's Temple, the place where legend said heaven had once touched earth. For nearly a decade, these knights did little visible protecting. There are no stories of daring rescues or battles fought during those early years. Instead, they were digging. Chroniclers mention tunnels beneath the Temple Mount, hidden chambers where the knights spent their time. What were they looking for? To most, it might have seemed like archaeology before its time. But to others, it looked like a quest for something far older and far more dangerous than coins or relics. The temple was gone, destroyed by the Babylonians centuries earlier, and later rebuilt and destroyed again by the Romans. But stories claimed that sacred objects had been hidden, buried deep before the invaders came. Some whispered of the Ark of the Covenant itself, concealed beneath the mount. Others believed in scrolls, schematics of the original temple, designs filled with measurements that revealed a cosmic pattern. The 9 knights, patient and secretive, were thought to have uncovered fragments of that mystery. When they finally emerged, the Templars were no longer a small band of obscure soldiers. They were granted official recognition by the Church, blessed by the Pope, and given authority no other order enjoyed. They spread across Europe, building fortresses and commanderies, growing into one of the most powerful organizations of the medieval world. But power was not their only legacy. They carried symbols, rituals, and knowledge that seemed to echo the lost temple they had once called home. Consider this. Their seals depicted 2 knights riding 1 horse, a strange image of unity and duality, a reminder perhaps of the twin pillars Boaz and Jachin. Their churches were often round, built in imitation of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, but also resonating with the geometry of the temple itself. Their rituals hinted at mysteries never written down, whispers of sacred words, of hidden guardianship, of a priest-king ideal where blood and power merged in ways uncomfortable for both monarchs and popes. It is easy to dismiss this as legend, but why did kings and priests alike fear them? Why were they accused of worshipping strange idols, of holding secret rites at night, of guarding a truth too dangerous for the world to know? Perhaps because they had found something beneath those stones in Jerusalem. Perhaps because their order was not about protecting pilgrims, but about protecting knowledge. In the end, their secrecy was their undoing. By the early 14th century, the Templars were betrayed, arrested, and burned as heretics. Yet the question lingers like smoke over the pyres. What did the 9 knights discover beneath the Temple Mount? What treasure, or what blueprint, was so powerful that it turned poor soldiers into guardians of a secret empire? Whatever it was, its shadow still moves through history, hinting that the true birth of the Templars was not about crusade, but custody. Beneath the golden dome of Al-Aqsa, in the years after the First Crusade, the ground trembled with more than prayer. The 9 knights who would become the Templars had sworn themselves to poverty, chastity, and obedience. But their greatest devotion seemed to be to the soil itself. They vanished into tunnels, working in silence, digging through ancient stone as if guided by a secret map no one else could see. For nearly a decade they stayed hidden, emerging rarely, their swords unstained by battle, their names absent from heroic chronicles. Instead, whispers spread. What were they doing beneath the Temple Mount? Jerusalem was a city layered with memory. Every conquest left ruins piled upon ruins. Beneath the Al-Aqsa Mosque lay the foundations of something older, the remnants of Solomon's temple. And it was there, so the rumours went, that the knights searched. Not for treasure in the ordinary sense, but for knowledge. Stories told of scrolls inscribed with the measurements of the first temple, of golden relics tucked away before Babylonian flames consumed the sanctuary, of maps and codes etched into stone itself. To most, these were only tales, yet something about the knights' behaviour fueled the imagination. Their secrecy was too deliberate, their silence too perfect. Years later, strange coincidences began to surface. Across Europe, cathedrals rose that seemed to echo a geometry far older than Christian tradition. Look at Chartres, with its soaring vaults and windows like wheels of light. Look at Notre Dame in Paris, begun not long after the Templars returned. The symmetry, the ratios, the careful alignment with the stars, all felt less like innovation and more like rediscovery, as if the architects had been given a blueprint, not of their time, but of a forgotten one, a Solomonic plan disguised in Gothic stone. Imagine for a moment the scene underground, torches flickering against carved walls, knights brushing dirt away from an inscription half buried. The thrill of seeing ancient measurements, cubits turned into ratios, a code that spoke not only of construction, but of cosmology. If they truly found such things, they would not parade them through the streets. They would guard them, pass them only to those who could be trusted, encode them into ritual and symbol so that the knowledge could survive without ever being spoken aloud. This might explain why the Templars gained such sudden influence. From obscurity, they leapt into favour with kings and popes, showered with wealth and land. Their secret may not have been gold, but something more valuable, something that gave them confidence and authority. Knowledge is power, and sacred knowledge is power multiplied. The silence of their years beneath Al-Aqsa may have been the birth of their mystery, the seed of legends that would haunt them forever. Skeptics will say it is fantasy. No scrolls survive, no relics appear in any inventory, yet the architecture stands. The Gothic cathedrals breathe with proportions that match the whispers of Solomon's temple. The pillars, the arches, the light itself, all carry the same rhythm, as if the temple never truly died, but only changed its form. Perhaps the excavations left no visible treasure, but they left a mark in stone that still rises above us, silent, waiting to be read. The Ark of the Covenant is usually imagined as a golden chest, a relic from a distant age, glowing with mystery. But what if it was more than that? What if it was a kind of algorithm, a set of instructions that could be followed, replicated, and carried across centuries? In the book of Exodus, the ark is described with exact detail. It was to be made of acacia wood, a cubit and a half wide, 2.5 cubits long, and a cubit and a half high. It was overlaid inside and out with pure gold. It had rings and poles for carrying. On top rested the mercy seat with 2 cherubim facing each other, their wings forming a space in between. That space was not decoration. It was said to be the very place where God would appear. These details were not casual. Ancient builders rarely included precise measurements unless they carried meaning. The ark was less like a box and more like a device. Its construction created a space that functioned as a portable temple, a microcosm of the larger sanctuary. Wherever it went, the presence followed. This is why the Israelites carried it into battle, why it rested at the heart of the tabernacle, why it was placed in the Holy of Holies when Solomon built the first temple. It was not about wood or gold. It was about process, a technology of presence encoded in ratios and materials. Think of it like this: an algorithm is a recipe, a repeatable pattern. Follow the steps and you reach the same result. The ark seems to work this way. The dimensions formed a proportion that mirrored cosmic order. The gold, a metal that does not corrode, symbolized eternity. The acacia wood, resistant to rot, symbolized endurance. The poles made it mobile, a sanctuary that moved with the people. And the cherubim created a throne that was empty yet full, a place where the invisible became visible. Together, these elements formed not an idol, but a framework, a formula for manifesting the sacred. When the Templars lived on the Temple Mount, stories say they searched for the ark. Maybe they wanted the object itself, but maybe they sought its pattern. Imagine if they had found scrolls or fragments describing the construction, the ratios, the symbolic logic. That knowledge could have been passed into their order, later surfacing in Masonic rituals where builders are reminded that true architecture is more than stone, it is alignment with hidden law. This perspective also explains why the ark vanished so completely. Perhaps it was never about preserving one golden chest, but about carrying forward the knowledge it embodied. Once the proportions were known, once the process was memorized, the ark could be rebuilt anywhere. Every cathedral apse, every lodge tracing board, every sacred space that feels charged with unseen energy may be an echo of that original algorithm. So, when we picture the ark, maybe we should not see it as a lost relic locked in a cave or hidden in a vault. Maybe it is more alive than that. A set of instructions disguised as myth, a portable covenant still waiting to be understood, because if presence can be encoded in numbers and materials, then the ark was never just an object. It was a design, a secret that could be carried forever, hidden not in gold but in geometry. Walk into Chartres Cathedral on a clear morning and look up. Sunlight pours through the rose window, scattering colours across the stone floor like liquid fire. The geometry is so precise that light itself becomes part of the architecture. You might think you are standing in a church, but in truth you are inside a kind of circuit. The Gothic builders were not just stacking stone, they were encoding knowledge, proportions that whispered of Solomon's temple, turning Europe's skyline into scripture carved in light. The cathedrals of Chartres, Reims, and Notre Dame did not rise by accident. They appeared after the return of the Templars from Jerusalem in the 12th and 13th centuries, as if Europe suddenly remembered how to build like the ancients. The soaring vaults, the flying buttresses, the massive stained glass windows were engineering marvels, but the deeper marvel lay in the math. Ratios of height to width, the placement of pillars, even the length of the nave followed patterns eerily similar to those described in temple tradition. Numbers that symbolized creation, balance, and divine order were hidden in stone. The builders were not just masons, they were mathematicians, alchemists, and mystics. Take the rose window at Chartres. At first glance, it is a beautiful circle of glass. Look closer, and you see layers of symmetry, petals folding into petals, forming a cosmogram, a map of the universe. The circle, the square, and the triangle all overlap, shapes that in sacred geometry represent heaven, earth, and the bridge between them. The window does not just tell a story of saints. It encodes the structure of existence itself, a reminder that light passing through matter can reveal truth. Reims Cathedral carries similar secrets. Its towers and arches are aligned with astronomical points, marking solstices and equinoxes as if the building were a calendar. Notre Dame in Paris hides Fibonacci ratios in its design, numbers that appear in shells, flowers, and galaxies. These cathedrals are more than houses of worship. They are sky scripts, vast machines of resonance designed to mirror the Temple of Solomon in form and purpose. Step inside and you feel it, the vibration of something larger than human intention. Why did the builders hide such knowledge? Perhaps because in an age of crusades and inquisitions, symbols were safer than words. A priest could condemn a book, but he could not condemn a window without shattering it. Geometry was the perfect camouflage. To most it was decoration, to the initiated it was code. The Masons carved their lessons into stone where no one could erase them, lessons about harmony, balance, and the bridge between heaven and earth. When the Templars were accused of heresy, part of the fear may have been this very knowledge. If cathedrals carried Solomonic math, if builders had smuggled temple geometry into Europe, then the power of the church was not absolute. Truth had been preserved not in words but in stone, where anyone with eyes and patience could find it. The Gothic cathedrals were not just monuments to faith. They were circuits of light and shadow, eternal engines of meaning, still humming with secrets that refuse to fade. Secrecy is often dismissed as paranoia, a game played by those with something to hide. But in the medieval world, secrecy was survival. For the Templars, and later the Freemasons, silence was not just discipline, it was power. The vows, the signs, and the passwords created a barrier between those inside and those outside, a shield that allowed knowledge to circulate without ever being spoken in public. In a time when sacred architecture doubled as statecraft, keeping the code hidden was the difference between building a cathedral that whispered of heaven and being burned as a heretic for daring to suggest that God's blueprint could belong to anyone other than the church. Imagine a world where kings ruled by divine right and popes claimed authority over the souls of men. To suggest that sacred power could be carried in ratios, in geometry, in the silent handshake of a brotherhood was to challenge both throne and altar. The Masons and the Knights knew this. So they created layers of protection, passwords that changed with each degree of initiation, hand signs that identified who belonged and who did not, oaths that bound tongues in silence under penalty of death. These were not empty theatrics. They were shields forged out of ritual. The politics of silence ran deeper than fear. A password was not only a key to safety, it was a test of loyalty. To keep a secret proved that you valued the bond of the brotherhood above wealth or ambition. In a world driven by betrayal and power struggles, silence became the highest form of trust. Those who guarded the words could be trusted with geometry, with maps, with knowledge that might overturn kingdoms. Those who failed could never be allowed near the mysteries. Consider the building of Gothic cathedrals. Behind the soaring arches and radiant windows were men who carried knowledge that bridged centuries, knowledge perhaps linked to Solomon's temple. This was not just architecture, it was statecraft carved in stone. The placement of a pillar could echo cosmic order. The design of a window could encode theology that challenged papal decrees. To reveal this openly would have been suicide. but to hide it behind signs and pass words made it indestructible. The code could move across borders, whispered from master to apprentice, carried into new lodges and cathedrals, without ever leaving a trace on paper. The danger of this silence is why kings both feared and relied on such brotherhoods. They built their palaces with the same masons they suspected of heresy. They crowned themselves in cathedrals shaped by hidden codes they could not read. Power and secrecy lived side by side, each needing the other, each afraid of what might happen if the veil was lifted. When we hear of passwords today, we think of screens and locks, but in the medieval world, a password was something far heavier. It was a key to survival, a marker of belonging, and a spark of rebellion hidden beneath loyalty. To hold the word was to hold a fragment of power. To keep it was to prove you deserved it. And in that silence, the secret orders thrived, guarding not just knowledge, but the possibility of freedom disguised as geometry. The sun had barely risen on Friday the 13th of October in the year 1307, when the knock of soldiers shattered the quiet of dawn. Across France, the king's men stormed into Templar commanderies, dragging knights from their beds, chaining them like criminals, and seizing everything in sight. The order that had once been untouchable, blessed by popes and feared by kings, was suddenly broken in a single day. Philip IV, called Philip the Fair, had moved with ruthless precision. His kingdom owed the Templars money, and his throne leaned on fragile power. By crushing the order, he could erase his debts and seize their vast network of lands, treasuries, and fortresses. But the official charges went deeper than politics. The knights were accused of heresy, of spitting on the cross, of worshipping strange idols, and of guarding a secret too dangerous for Christendom. The trials that followed were not trials in any modern sense. Torture twisted tongues. Confessions poured out, each one shaped by fire and iron. Some knights admitted to denying Christ during initiation, claiming it was a test of loyalty. Others spoke of kissing rituals, of strange oaths, of worshipping a mysterious head known only as Baphomet. Was it a demon, a symbol, or a riddle of mistranslated words? No one could agree, and perhaps that was the point. Ambiguity fueled fear. A head, after all, could mean knowledge. A face could mean wisdom. Baphomet may have been nothing more than a cipher for Sophia, divine wisdom itself, misunderstood by those eager to see devils in shadows. Yet, behind the forced confessions, a question burned. What happened to the true secrets of the order? When the king's men raided the Templar temple in Paris, they expected to find vaults filled with gold. Instead, they found nothing. No treasures, no relics, no scrolls. It was as if the wealth of centuries had vanished overnight. Some say the Templars knew what was coming and spirited their treasures away, loading them onto ships that sailed from the port of La Rochelle and disappeared into the Atlantic. Others believe the secrets were never material, that the Templars carried with them knowledge from beneath the Temple Mount, geometry, codes, perhaps even a genealogy that challenged the very authority of Rome. Such things cannot be seized by soldiers. They can only be hidden in minds, in symbols, in silence. The Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, was burned at the stake in Paris in the year 1314, his body consumed in the same flames meant to erase his order's memory. But according to legend, as the fire rose, he cursed both king and pope, calling them to judgment before the year's end. Within months, both were dead, leaving behind a trail of whispers that the Templars' reach extended even from the grave. Friday, the 13th, entered folklore as a day of bad luck, but for the Templars it was the day the sword fell. Yet, even in their fall, the order managed to hold its silence. No document revealed their ultimate secret. No vault betrayed their true treasure. Perhaps that is their final victory. A decapitated order should have died, but their mystery survived. The silence of their last breath carried the echo of something still alive, waiting. hidden behind symbols that kings could never burn. When the fires of persecution consumed the Templars, many believed their secrets were gone forever. But history has a way of carrying fragments forward, sometimes in places no one expects. Out of the ashes of the Knights, another order slowly emerged, not on horseback but with hammers and chisels in hand. The stonemasons who built cathedrals across Europe began to form their own brotherhoods, guilds of craft bound by oaths, rituals, and codes of silence. At first, they were simply operative masons, men who cut stone and raised towers. Yet, over time, something shifted. The guilds became more than workplaces. They became lodges, places where knowledge, both practical and symbolic, was guarded and passed on. By the late Middle Ages, these lodges no longer admitted only working builders. Nobles, scholars, and men of influence were invited inside, not to carve stone, but to learn the lessons hidden in the builder's craft. Thus began the transformation from operative masons to speculative Freemasons. The tools of the trade, the square, the compass, the level, were no longer just for measuring stone. They became metaphors, teaching morality, balance, and harmony. The cathedral itself became a symbol, and the lodge a portable temple that could be carried anywhere in the world. In this new vision, the initiate was no longer simply learning a trade. He became a living cornerstone, shaped by ritual as carefully as stone was shaped by chisel. The initiation mimicked the work of builders. Rough ashlar, the uncut stone, symbolized the unrefined self. With lessons and discipline, it became smooth ashlar, ready to take its place in the temple of humanity. The lodge, with its tracing boards and symbolic pillars, echoed the Temple of Solomon, reminding each brother that he was not just building walls of stone, but a structure of spirit. The apron, once a practical piece of leather worn to protect clothes from dust and sparks, was transformed into a badge of honor. White and clean, it symbolized purity of intention, a reminder that the true work of the mason was inner work. To wear it was to declare yourself a builder of the invisible temple, a participant in a tradition stretching back not only to cathedral masons, but to the very myths of Hiram Abiff and Solomon's sacred house. What makes this transition so remarkable is how seamless it seems. There is no moment where the Templars vanish and the Freemasons appear. Instead, there is a slow blending, a current moving underground. The vows of secrecy, the fascination with Solomon's temple, the rituals of death and rebirth, all found new homes in the lodges. The symbols survived by adapting, and in that adaptation, they spread far wider than any one order could have imagined. By the 17th century, Freemasonry had become an international fraternity, a network of lodges carrying the temple myth into every city. The lodge was not stone and mortar, but ritual and symbol. It was a temple without walls, a space where builders worked not with chisels but with words, not with towers but with lives. And in this way, from ashes to aprons, the ancient dream of a sacred architecture continued, no longer tied to one building, but to the living stones of those who carried it forward. Step into a Masonic lodge, and you will notice something curious. At the front of the room stand two great pillars, often painted or carved, their names whispered across centuries, Boaz and Jachin. They were once bronze giants guarding the entrance to Solomon's temple, symbols of strength and establishment, but in the lodge they are more than decoration. They are gateways, thresholds between ordinary life and sacred drama. Every initiate who passes between them is not simply walking across a floor. He is stepping into a story that has been retold for nearly 3,000 years. The lodge is built as a kind of miniature temple. Its floor is checkered in black and white squares, representing light and darkness, good and evil, the duality that defines human life. On the tracing boards, painted diagrams lay out the great symbols of the craft: compasses, squares, the rough and smooth ashlars, and of course the twin pillars themselves. These boards are not simple drawings. They are teaching maps, designed to carry the initiate's mind into the memory of the first temple, and beyond it into the mysteries that temple concealed. When the meeting begins, it is not casual. It unfolds as a morality play, a ritual designed to reenact the building of the temple. Each role, each phrase, each movement echoes the ancient work of Solomon and his master builders. The candidate plays the part of one entering the temple for the first time, blindfolded at first, guided across the checkered floor, passing between Boaz and Jachin as if leaving behind the world of the profane and entering the sacred. The ritual is not about history, but about transformation. The twin pillars serve as reminders of balance. Boaz, the pillar of strength, anchors the initiate in endurance and stability. Jachin, the pillar of establishment, represents order and purpose. Together, they frame the path of every Freemason. To live well, one must stand between strength and order, not lost in chaos, not rigid in tyranny, but balanced. Passing between them is a symbol of becoming whole, of stepping into harmony. But there is a deeper layer too. In ancient architecture, pillars were not just supports. They connected heaven and earth, axis points that held up the sky. In the lodge, Boaz and Jachin carry the same weight. They are not mere columns. They are vertical bridges, a constant reminder that the initiate stands between two worlds, the earthly and the divine. Each meeting, when brothers gather, they rehearse this passage again and again. They walk the same floor, they look upon the same symbols, they listen to the same story of builders, murder, loss, and recovery. The repetition is the point. It shapes memory, chisels character, until the temple is no longer in Jerusalem or in stone cathedrals, but in the heart of each man who kneels before the pillars. So Boaz and Jachin live on, reborn in lodges across the world, no longer bronze giants, no longer standing on Mount Zion, but carried as symbols in every initiation. They are still gateways, still guardians, still the silent teachers of a temple that has never really disappeared, only shifted into ritual and memory. There is a secret that hovers at the center of Masonic ritual, a secret that is always spoken of but never fully revealed. It is called the lost word. To outsiders, this might sound like a puzzle or a code, but within the lodge it is treated as something far more profound. The word is said to have been the true name of God, ineffable, unutterable, and filled with power. In legend, it was known to a select few, including Hiram Abiff, the master builder of Solomon's temple. When Hiram was struck down and carried to his grave, the word was lost with him. Ever since, the brothers have sought to recover it, reenacting the search in degree after degree, generation after generation. The idea of a name too sacred to pronounce has ancient roots. In Jewish tradition, the Tetragrammaton, the 4 letters of the divine name, was spoken only by the high priest, and only once a year within the Holy of Holies. That word was believed to carry creation itself, a thunder of meaning too great for common speech. In the Masonic drama, this ineffable name is broken, fragmented, or hidden. Instead of revealing it directly, substitutes are given, words that stand in for the real thing. The search continues, but the goal is never reached, as if to say that the divine cannot be grasped by a single tongue or syllable. For the initiate, this quest becomes a mirror of his own search for meaning. The lost word is not just a name out of history. It is a symbol of the truths each person chases, the understanding of life, purpose, and the mystery of death. To seek the word is to admit that there is always something missing, always something beyond reach, and yet to keep searching anyway. That search becomes the heartbeat of the craft, a rhythm that ties every degree together like chapters of one long story. Think of how this reflects the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark was once the center of divine presence, the place where God's voice was heard. When it vanished, so did the thunder of that presence. What remains is silence, and into that silence the lost word is whispered. In a sense, the word becomes the Ark reborn, not as an object but as a quest. Just as the Ark was said to carry the covenant, the Word carries the promise of ultimate understanding. Both are gone, both leave behind absence, and both drive the faithful to seek. The beauty of this motif is that it refuses to resolve. There is no revelation, no secret syllable passed at the end. The very act of not knowing becomes the lesson. To accept the mystery is to accept life as unfinished, to keep building even when the temple seems incomplete. The word may be lost, but the search for it turns every brother into a seeker, a builder not just of stone but of meaning. And that search, endless and unfulfilled, is what keeps the temple alive, one silent syllable at a time. Kings have always ruled with swords and crowns, but there was another kind of power hidden in plain sight, a power not of armies but of numbers. The builders called it the royal art. It was geometry, the science of lines, ratios, and patterns, treated not as math alone but as sacred language. To draw a circle, to divide a line, to set a compass to stone was to echo creation itself. The ancients believed God had written the universe in numbers, and to read those numbers was to glimpse the mind of the divine. For this reason, geometry became the chosen tongue of a veiled priesthood, a way to guard truths too dangerous to speak in ordinary words. One of the simplest shapes held the deepest meaning. The vesica piscis, formed when two circles overlap so that each passes through the other's centre, appears in cathedral windows, in tracing boards, and even in the floor plans of sacred sites. It looks simple, almost childlike, but within it are the roots of proportion. From its curves you can extract the square, the triangle, the golden ratio. It is a seed of architecture, a code hidden in a single shape, and for those who studied it, a doorway to mysteries that linked heaven and earth. The tradition reached back further still, to Pythagoras, in the 6th century before Christ. His school taught that numbers were not mere quantities, but qualities, each carrying character and power. The number 3 symbolized harmony, the number 4 stability, the number 7 mystery. The Pythagoreans treated the triangle as sacred, believing it represented the balance of opposites joined by unity. When medieval builders carved triangles into cathedral walls, or embedded sevens into floor tiles, they were not solving math problems. They were writing prayers in stone, encoding wisdom in ratios only the trained could see. Kabbalah, the Jewish mystical tradition, added another layer to this secret language. In its diagrams, such as the tree of life, numbers and letters map the path from the human to the divine. Each sphere on the tree represents an aspect of creation, connected by lines that show how energy flows from infinite spirit into finite matter. To trace the tree is to walk the steps of creation itself. When this knowledge filtered into Europe through scholars and mystics, it fused with Pythagoras and Christian symbolism, shaping the way Masons thought about their art. A cathedral was not just a building. It was a living tree of life, a geometry of the king hidden in towers and windows. By using number and line as their language, the builders ensured secrecy. Words could be misheard, texts burned, but a ratio carved into a window would outlast centuries. A vesica set in glass could whisper across generations. Even when kings tried to silence heresy, geometry slipped through unnoticed, because to the untrained it was only design. Yet to those initiated, it was scripture written without letters. The royal art endured because it spoke silently, carrying the wisdom of priest and builder alike, turning stone into code and code into legacy. When the Templars fell in France in the early 14th century, many believed the order had been erased in fire and chains. Yet across the sea, in the misty highlands of Scotland, legends whisper that the knights found refuge. Scotland at that time was excommunicated from Rome, its king, Robert the Bruce, outlawed after defying papal authority. In that small window of rebellion, the land became a sanctuary. If Templar ships really sailed from La Rochelle, as chroniclers suggest, Scotland would have been one of the few safe harbours left to them. The Sinclair family, Lords of Rosslyn, appear again and again in these tales. Their line was tied to builders and patrons, men with both wealth and a taste for mystery. By the 15th century, William Sinclair commissioned the construction of Rosslyn Chapel, a building so dense with carvings and symbols that it feels less like a church and more like a cipher in stone. Angels play bagpipes, vines coil into patterns of sacred geometry, and cubes etched with musical notes dot the walls. The entire structure reads like a footnote to Jerusalem, as if the memory of the temple had been carefully transplanted into Scottish soil. Walk into Rosslyn, and the effect is overwhelming. Pillars twist like DNA strands, ceilings bloom with roses, stars, and endless knots. The famous apprentice pillar, said to have been carved by a young mason who dreamed the design in a vision, rises with serpentine curves that mirror myths from Norse and Middle Eastern traditions alike. The building does not belong to one culture. It is a collage of echoes, blending Christian imagery with symbols that trace back to Kabbalah, alchemy, and Templar lore. The question is, how did such knowledge find its way into a small chapel in the Scottish countryside? The legend says that the Sinclair family sheltered Templars fleeing persecution, that they inherited not only wealth but ritual, passwords, and perhaps relics carried from Jerusalem. If so, Rosslyn becomes more than a chapel. It becomes a stone archive, a coded reminder that the line of the temple never truly broke. The patterns etched into its walls are not random decorations, but a visual scripture, a continuation of the Solomonic dream. Some even claim that hidden beneath Rosslyn lies a vault, sealed and untouched, containing treasures spirited away from the Holy Land. Scrolls, relics, maybe even the Ark itself. No excavation has ever been allowed, but ground scans hint at chambers below. Whether truth or myth, the secrecy only adds to the sense that Rosslyn is not finished telling its story. Even without hidden vaults, the chapel stands as a testament to continuity. At a time when Europe was trying to forget the Templars, Rosslyn remembered. Its chisel script carved into stone kept alive the whispers of Jerusalem, the ratios of Solomon's temple, the rituals of builders who never stopped searching for the lost word. In its carvings you can almost hear the echo of knights kneeling in shadow, carrying forward a legacy that refused to die, reborn among the Scottish hills. The story of Freemasonry did not end with lodges and aprons. As the brotherhood spread, its rituals branched into rivers of initiation, each carrying echoes of the same ancient source. Two of the most famous streams became known as the Scottish Rite and the York Rite. To the outsider, these might look like collections of ceremonies stitched together over time, but to the initiate, they are chapters of one long play, a drama that begins with the fall of the temple and ends with its repair. The compass, the square, and the rose cross are not just symbols here. They are props in a theatre where history, myth, and morality intertwine. The Scottish Rite developed across continental Europe and grew into a system of 33 degrees. Each step was like unlocking a door to another layer of allegory. Some degrees told stories of knights returning from the Crusades, guardians of sacred knowledge who vowed to protect it at all costs. Others unfolded Solomonic dramas, reenacting the building of the temple, the murder of Hiram Abiff, and the eternal search for the lost word. At its heart, the Scottish Rite was a quest, a pilgrimage through history, where every symbol revealed another fragment of the mystery. The rose cross appeared as a sign of resurrection, suggesting that even when the temple fell and the word was lost, truth could rise again from ashes. The York Rite took shape in England and America, focusing on the building of the first and second temples. Its degrees reimagined the return from Babylon, the rebuilding of the sanctuary, and the struggles of those who carried fragments of knowledge through exile. Here, the initiate did not only mourn what was destroyed, but took part in restoring it. Each ceremony became a rehearsal of repairing what was lost, of lifting the scattered stones and placing them back into order. It was not just history acted out. It was identity, a way of telling every brother that he too was part of the rebuilding. Both systems carried forward the same undercurrent. The temple was more than stone, it was the human soul. Its fall was not just the Babylonian siege or the Roman destruction. It was the fall of every person into forgetfulness, every loss of meaning, every silence where the word once thundered. And its repair was not just about Jerusalem. It was about the inner sanctuary, the secret chamber of the heart, where balance could be restored. The compass traced this balance, drawing the circle that enclosed harmony. The square ensured that the foundation was just. Together they turned initiation into architecture, morality into geometry. What made these rites endure was their ability to retell the same story in countless ways. Whether through the rose cross of the Scottish Rite or the rebuilding drama of the York Rite, the initiate was reminded that he was not only a seeker, but also a builder. The fall of the temple was inevitable, but so was its repair, and every degree, every ritual, every whispered word of the compass carried the promise that what was broken could always be made whole again. The 18th century was a time when ideas began to move faster than armies. Across Europe, in smoke-filled rooms and quiet town halls, lodges hummed with conversation. Freemasons gathered not only to practice their rituals, but to debate philosophy, science, and the nature of governance. To outsiders, these were clubs for gentlemen, full of strange symbols, coded handshakes, and secret passwords. But within those walls, something more profound was taking shape. Men were learning to think differently. They were learning that the world could be organized not only by kings and churches, but by principles, reason, and geometry. Yet the paradox was always present. The lodges preserved symbols of monarchy, echoes of the Solomonic temple, twin pillars, and royal arches. The aprons, the compasses, the square, all whispered of kingship, divine order, and sacred architecture. And yet, in the same rooms, ideas of liberty and equality were being sown. Revolution drew its inspiration from these strange, layered rituals. Men who had memorized the gestures of ancient kings also debated constitutions, the separation of powers, and rights of citizens. Reason was harnessed to ritual, and ritual gave reason a sacred weight. What they learned beneath lodge ceilings was that authority and knowledge could be separated, that symbols could survive while dogma was questioned, and that the lessons of the past could fuel the construction of a new world. In Paris and London, lodges became crucibles for revolutionary thought. The compasses traced circles that enclosed visions of freedom. The squares guaranteed that foundations were not just in stone, but in society. In America, men like George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, and Paul Revere carried the lessons learned inside the lodge into the public sphere. They drew from a golden cup, older than any constitution, older than any monarchy, and filled it with ideals shaped by geometry, allegory, and moral philosophy. Liberty was not just a political term. It was a moral experiment grounded in the ethics of a craft that had once built temples and preserved secrets. But this light of reason was never complete. It existed alongside secrecy, symbolism, and the shadows of a sacred past. Men could argue for equality while wearing aprons that honored kings. They could debate revolution while invoking rituals designed to preserve ancient mysteries. The contradiction was deliberate. Knowledge could empower without exposing, could guide without undermining the structure that contained it. The lodges became a mirror of the world they hoped to create. Order and freedom coexisting, reason and ritual entwined, the past and the future in constant dialogue. By the end of the century, it was clear that the lodges had done more than preserve the memory of kings and temples. They had created a space where ideas could flourish in the shadow of tradition, where reason could meet myth, and where revolutions could drink from a cup filled with something older than crowns. The Enlightenment had arrived, but without the light of complete transparency, without the glare of absolute disclosure, It was a golden dawn filtered through aprons and secrets, a world being remade while still honouring the architecture of a temple that no longer stood. Walk through the streets of London, and you might not notice the hidden patterns beneath your feet. Straight avenues cut across the city, like rulers on a map, sightlines framed by statues, domes, and spires. Look closer, and you realise the city is more than a collection of buildings. It is a temple in disguise. Every square, every obelisk, every cross street carries meaning, echoes of geometry borrowed from sacred spaces. The planners, many of them inspired by lodge traditions, treated the city as a sanctum, a space where the divine and human intersected. In Washington, D.C., the effect is even clearer. Laid out in the late 1800s, the streets form star-shaped patterns, triangles, and pentagrams, all centered on the Capitol. Obelisks rise like silent sentinels, recalling the pharaohs, the temple, and the aspirations of a new republic. The Mall is more than a park. It is a ceremonial corridor aligned with the sun, moon, and stars, carrying subtle instructions to those who know how to read it. Monuments act as markers in a vast urban ritual, teaching, reminding, and inspiring. The founders were not merely architects, they were initiates, embedding morality and order into the city's blueprint. From Paris to Edinburgh, the same principles repeat. A civic square can mirror the dimensions of the Ark. A cathedral facade can echo the proportions of Boaz and Jachin. Public spaces become stages for symbolism, teaching without words, guiding without enforcement. Citizens move unknowingly through a city that remembers secrets, a city that enacts a ritual every time someone follows a diagonal avenue or gazes down a perfectly aligned boulevard. The sacred has been urbanized, and every passerby participates in an invisible liturgy. Even smaller towns carry traces of this thinking. Grid patterns, spiral streets, and the placement of churches at focal points are not random. Local planners absorbed centuries of knowledge, from Solomonic architects to Templar engineers to Masonic designers, and applied it to human settlements. Civic planning becomes a silent classroom. The ethics of space, the geometry of morality, and the language of stone are all encoded into the streets, the parks, and the sightlines. It is a lesson in power, culture, and spirituality, disguised as everyday life. The more you look, the more the connections reveal themselves. Statues line the avenues in symbolic order, fountains mark cardinal points, and obelisks act as metaphysical compasses. The city becomes a living temple, a space where ordinary citizens unknowingly interact with centuries of ritual knowledge. And just like a lodge, understanding comes in layers. To most, it is simply a beautiful city, but for those trained in geometry, symbol, and history, it is a map of moral, political, and spiritual intention. The divine is embedded in every sightline, every axis, every carefully measured angle. Cities as temples are the ultimate expression of hidden order. They teach that public space is more than functional. It is sacred, deliberate, and coded. Walk its streets carefully, observe its lines, and you may find yourself reading the legacy of kings, architects, and initiates, learning a ritual older than the city itself, and understanding that the world around you is more than it seems. Throughout history, rulers have feared what they cannot fully control, and nothing threatened both church and crown more than the growing power of the builders. In the late 1300s, papal bulls began to appear, condemning secret societies and prohibiting gatherings of Masons without ecclesiastical approval. The Church viewed these men not merely as artisans, but as potential rivals. They carried knowledge of sacred geometry, of hidden symbology, and of ritual codes that traced back to Solomon's temple. The square and compass were not just tools. They were emblems of authority outside of Rome's reach. Kings, too, watched with suspicion. Operative Masons worked on castles and cathedrals that shaped the landscape of power. Every stone placed, every proportion measured, carried lessons in discipline, foresight, and moral order. Monarchs feared a priesthood without robes that could influence thought and cultivate loyalty through symbols rather than decree. The lodge became a parallel society, a school of ethics and geometry, and the rulers understood that influence is far stronger when invisible. The more the builders practiced, the more their authority in their own sphere grew, and the more the crown felt its own reach limited. The accusations were not entirely unfounded. Masonic rituals incorporated allegories from ancient temples, tales of Hiram Abiff, and ethical codes that emphasized equality, justice, and the preservation of knowledge. These lessons were transformative. Apprentices learned not just to craft stone, but to read the world, to see lines, angles, and proportions as a moral and spiritual language. To the ordinary ruler, this invisible literacy was dangerous. It offered a framework for loyalty, instruction, and community that could not be taxed, commanded, or excommunicated. The Church's response was methodical. Condemnations escalated to bans, sometimes threatening excommunication. Any Mason who publicly defied these edicts risked the loss of both faith and social standing. Bulls issued by Popes Clement V and Benedict XIV specifically targeted secret gatherings, warning that forbidden knowledge could lead to heresy, corruption, and even rebellion. The square and compass became symbols of a threat, both spiritual and temporal, a reminder that human understanding might rival divine authority if left unchecked. Despite this pressure, the lodges survived. They adapted, adopting coded language, private meeting halls, and allegorical teachings that disguised their origin. Where one avenue was closed, another opened. And over time, Freemasonry evolved into a network of ethical instruction, philosophical discussion, and symbolic practice that could coexist with the Crown and Church while still preserving its independent essence. This tension between authority and craft persisted for centuries, shaping the relationship between religion, monarchy, and society. The lesson remains visible today in the symbols hidden in architecture, in civic rituals, and in the emblems carried across generations. Church, crown, and counter-ritual demonstrate the delicate balance between obedience and knowledge, control, and curiosity. The builders were never just masons. They were guardians of a language older than kingdoms, a heritage the powerful could not suppress and the wise could never fully reveal. History has a strange way of hiding its secrets. Some stories are carefully preserved in charters, records, and parchments, while others are deliberately tangled with myths and lies. The priory romances, for example, are full of intrigue, of grand claims about secret lineages and holy blood, but most scholars dismiss them as fabrications. Yet, within these forgeries, fragments of truth survive. The documents were designed to distract, to entertain, to draw attention away from real events and real networks of knowledge. They act like smoke, hiding embers of something authentic beneath. In the early 15th century, charters appeared claiming that secret societies safeguarded treasures and sacred knowledge. Many were clearly forged, signed with names of nobles long dead, and yet some contained accurate records of land ownership, guild affiliations, and genealogies. For historians and Masonic scholars, this meant they had to learn to separate legend from reality carefully. Real guild records show apprentices, masters, and lodges operating under strict codes. The rituals, while often wrapped in allegory, were meticulously recorded and sometimes matched architectural evidence in cathedrals and civic buildings. Frauds, like the Priory of Sion documents circulated in the mid-20th century, further complicated matters. Pierre Plantard claimed ancient rights and a hidden lineage tracing back to sacred kings. Evidence suggests he doctored and fabricated much of it, yet the persistent symbols, names, and alignments he referenced were often based on real history, including genuine Templar connections and noble genealogies. This blend of fiction and fact created a camouflage that makes the hunt for truth both fascinating and frustrating. The lesson is that myths often survive where records fail. They encode memory in stories rather than in official books. Tales of hidden treasures, lost words, or secret bloodlines attract attention and generate skepticism, but they also preserve hints of something older and more profound. The moral codes, symbols, and rituals embedded in the myths can point toward the authentic lineage of thought and practice. Architects of Gothic cathedrals, for example, left patterns and ratios that corresponded to measurements described in ancient documents. Even if the stories around these constructions are embellished, the structures themselves carry truth in stone. Sifting through these layers requires careful attention. Historians examine handwriting, ink, and parchment to identify when and where a document was actually created. They cross-reference with other records, like civic rolls, religious chronicles, and personal diaries. Often, what first appears to be a fabrication contains kernels of truth, tiny details that survive centuries because someone wanted them remembered. The challenge is recognizing these kernels without being seduced by the fiction surrounding them. In this tangled landscape, truth is camouflaged but not extinguished. Forgeries and myths serve as both shield and guide, protecting information while allowing it to survive across centuries of upheaval. The priory romances, fabricated charters, and authentic guild records together form a tapestry, a map for those willing to look closely. They teach that history is not always straightforward, that stories must be questioned, and that sometimes the most outrageous tale carries the smallest, most vital truth hidden in plain sight. When people think of treasures, they usually imagine chests overflowing with gold, silver, and jewels. But the Solomonic cult teaches a different kind of wealth, one measured not in coins but in knowledge, precision, and ritual. Imagine standing inside a cathedral where sunlight filters through rose windows. Each beam is carefully calculated, each stone placed according to measurements that stretch back thousands of years. The treasure here is not something you can hold. It is a method, a way of seeing the world and shaping it, a knowledge passed from master to apprentice in whispers and gestures. The real crown jewel is a system of measures. Lengths, ratios, and angles were encoded in sacred spaces, in the pillars of Boaz and Jachin, and in the floors of Gothic cathedrals. These measurements were more than architectural guidelines. They were keys to a cosmic order, a language that allowed those initiated to understand patterns in nature, in the heavens, and in human behavior. By learning this method, one could build structures that reflected divine harmony and maintain a kind of spiritual and civic balance. Passwords and secret signs act as another form of treasure. They are not magic words to summon gold, but tools to safeguard knowledge. A simple handshake or phrase can mark a fellow initiate, ensuring that rituals and techniques are passed only to those prepared to honor them. In medieval lodges, these signs were crucial because the teachings of the Solomonic method could not be written down plainly. Their value depended on human memory, practice, and discretion. The treasure is alive, evolving with each generation that learns and applies it. Rites and ceremonies are the third component. Each ritual, whether a Masonic initiation or a Templar procession, reinforces the principles behind the measures and passwords. They teach patience, observation, and respect for the hidden order of the world. Participants internalize lessons that cannot be grasped through reading alone. The treasure is embedded in experience. It is a way to align mind, body, and spirit with a pattern that stretches across time, connecting past masters to present seekers. Understanding this treasure requires a shift in perspective. Instead of digging for a chest in the dirt, the seeker studies geometry, light, proportion, and ritual. The treasure is encoded in stone, in scrolls, in the motions and words of those who carry the knowledge forward. When Napoleon Bonaparte revived the bee as a symbol on his robe, it was not a reference to gold, but to continuity, to inherited method and meaning. The Solomonic cult's wealth survives in this continuity, hidden in plain sight. The brilliance of this treasure is that it cannot be stolen. Gold can be taken, looted, or melted, but a method, once taught, becomes part of a person. It flows through generations, sometimes altered, sometimes forgotten, but never entirely destroyed. The true Solomonic treasure is a living, breathing inheritance. It is the ability to see the sacred in the everyday, to build and to understand in ways that echo the wisdom of the first temple. Those who seek it discover that the richest chest in history is not filled with coins, but with understanding, practice, and the silent knowledge that endures longer than any crown. Throughout history, symbols of the temple have been copied, twisted, and misunderstood. The black sun is one of the most notorious examples, a shadow cast over the original meaning of Solomonic wisdom. What began as a geometric emblem representing cycles, regeneration, and hidden knowledge became appropriated by groups with very different intentions. During the early 20th century, certain secret societies and political movements misread the signs of the Solomonic cult, seeking power not through understanding, but through domination. They saw the black sun as a source of energy, authority, even mystic supremacy, rather than a reminder of balance and sacred proportion. The mirror that once reflected spiritual lessons became broken in this process. Rituals designed to teach morality, geometry, and cosmic awareness were distorted into myths of invincibility and conquest. Initiates who had once learned to see patterns in light, stone, and architecture were now imagined as warriors of a hidden empire. The original purpose of the teachings, to cultivate wisdom and harmony, was replaced by obsession, fear, and the allure of ultimate power. This shadow did not remain contained in the past. In modern times, elements of these misreadings appear in esoteric literature, occult practices, and popular culture. People study symbols without context, believing that geometry or hidden codes can grant success or influence without effort or understanding. Secretive rituals are imitated without grasping the lessons encoded in their motions. The danger is not in the symbols themselves, but in the corruption of their meaning. A map of light and proportion becomes a blueprint for hubris if detached from the ethical teachings of the past. The black sun also serves as a cautionary emblem. It reminds us that knowledge without guidance can be dangerous. In the Solomonic tradition, every tool, every measure, every password had a purpose tied to balance, ethics, and observation. When these lessons are ignored, the pursuit of power can eclipse reason. History is filled with examples of seekers misled by the promise of hidden dominion, applying methods they did not understand, and expecting results that were never intended. Yet, even in the shadow, fragments of truth survive. Careful study shows echoes of the original teachings, patterns hidden beneath layers of misinterpretation. The broken mirror reflects not just error, but the possibility of restoration. Those who approach these symbols with curiosity, respect, and patience can uncover insights that transcend the distortions of history. The black sun reminds us to question motives, to seek understanding rather than domination, and to honor the intentions of the Solomonic architects who encoded lessons in stone and ritual. In this chapter, the story of the black sun is both a warning and a guide. It is a reminder that power divorced from wisdom becomes a shadow. The Solomonic method, misappropriated and misunderstood, offers a lesson about responsibility. Symbols are not merely objects. They carry meaning that can be lost, distorted, or corrupted. By returning to the original principles of geometry, ritual, and ethics, the black sun becomes not a mark of fear, but a call to careful, thoughtful engagement with the past. Those who study it well learn that shadows exist only because there was once a light to be reflected, a method to be preserved, and a path to understanding that remains, waiting for those who look beyond appearances. The age of stone and parchment is shifting into the age of code. CAD files, laser scans, and digital blueprints now capture the geometry of cathedrals, the precise angles of rose windows, and the measurements of long-forgotten Solomonic pillars. Architects and historians no longer rely solely on dusty manuscripts. They feed data into powerful computers, comparing dimensions, ratios, and alignments across continents. The temple, once a physical space, now lives in servers, a virtual sanctum that stretches from Paris to Jerusalem with just a click. AI programs trace the same sacred ratios that stonemasons once etched into floors and vaults. Every line, every arch, every spiral is analyzed for hidden patterns. Machines can cross-reference thousands of documents in seconds, revealing connections that human researchers might never notice. The pillars of Boaz and Jachin, once carved in stone, are now vectors in a virtual model. Their significance shifts from ritual to data, but the echo of their original power remains. Digital replicas allow anyone to explore the temple's architecture, as if stepping into its halls centuries ago, seeing geometry as both art and code. Beyond architecture, lineage itself becomes a dataset. Genealogists and historians digitize records of European nobility, connecting marriages, births, and deaths across generations. Algorithms search for patterns in names, symbols, and regions. Descendants of ancient families can be traced in ways impossible before. Bloodlines, once hidden by secrecy, now exist as nodes in a sprawling network, their connections waiting to be discovered. AI does not judge, it does not dismiss. It simply finds patterns, bringing whispers of the past into clarity. This virtual temple is not just a tool for study. It transforms initiation and ritual into something participatory and interactive. Simulations allow Freemasons, historians, and curious minds to explore how initiates once moved through symbolic spaces, tracing the lessons of the lost word and the geometry of the king. Ethical considerations remain. The knowledge encoded in these models carries centuries of sacred intent. Misunderstanding or misuse can distort meaning just as easily as physical missteps once did in the stone temple. Yet there is liberation in digitization. Rare manuscripts once hidden behind vault doors can now be scanned and shared. Fragile architectural features can be preserved virtually, protecting them from decay and conflict. The temple migrates into code, no longer confined to a single place, no longer vulnerable to fire, war, or neglect. Its essence survives in algorithms, 3D renderings, and interactive archives. Knowledge that was once guarded by secret orders is now accessible to anyone willing to learn. In this new era, the Solomonic cult's legacy continues. CAD files, laser scans, and AI tracing are not just technology. They are the modern pillars of understanding, standing in for the stone and ritual of centuries past. The temple breathes in servers, in lines of code, and in datasets. Initiates may not walk the floors, but they can follow the architecture, the ratios, and the lineage digitally. What was once secret survives not in shadows but in data. The temple has evolved, and its sacred patterns pulse quietly across the networks of the world, waiting for those who will see the code and understand the method. Initiation is not merely a ceremony, it is a technology, a method to encode memory, morality, and allegiance into the mind and body of each participant. From the earliest Freemasons to modern lodges, rituals have been carefully designed to impress lessons onto memory through story, movement, and symbol. Each step, each gesture, and each word carries weight. A lodge room is not just a meeting hall. It is a memory palace where moral architecture is built, where the initiate learns to navigate a space of knowledge and virtue with precision and awareness. The handshake is more than a greeting. It is a signal, a recognition, a link in a chain that spans centuries. Through a single grasp, a silent language is exchanged, encoding shared truths and secrets into the body and the mind. This small gesture binds the scattered priesthood into a single living organism. Across Europe, across oceans, and across time, Members who have never met still share this connection. Each handshake becomes a vector of trust, a way to transmit instruction without words, a reminder that membership carries responsibility as well as knowledge. Memory palaces, the spatial techniques used in initiation, transform abstract lessons into vivid mental architecture. The initiate walks through imagined halls where each symbol, each object, and each pillar carries a moral or spiritual teaching. Lessons of honesty, diligence, courage, and discretion are never abstract. They are experienced, embedded in imagined corridors, visualized symbols, and ritual acts. The temple is recreated in the mind, its geometry mapped onto thought, its codes engraved onto the psyche. The moral engineering of initiation does not rely solely on imagination. It relies on repetition, on ritual performance that creates muscle memory and emotional imprinting. Words, gestures, symbols, and sequences are practiced until they become second nature. The lodge itself functions as a lab, a controlled environment where ethics, geometry, and sacred history converge. Each degree in the lodge represents a level of understanding, a deeper internalization of the lessons encoded by centuries of masters before. The master's grip extends beyond instruction. It establishes continuity, creating a chain that links each new initiate to a lineage of knowledge stretching back to the Templars, the operative Masons, and the mythic builders of Solomon's Temple. This chain is resilient. Even when documents are lost, buildings crumble, and bloodlines scatter, the living memory encoded through initiation preserves the method. The lodge becomes a repository of experience, a temple in the mind, a network of disciplined individuals whose shared memory sustains knowledge even when history forgets. In the end, initiation is both technology and covenant. It preserves sacred geometry, moral lessons, and the hidden history of the temple. It binds members across generations, continents, and time. The handshake, the gestures, the memory palaces, and the moral architecture together ensure that even if stone, parchment, and bloodlines fade, the method endures. Through careful training, the scattered priesthood becomes a single body, a living network carrying the legacy of the temple forward, one mind at a time, quietly, deliberately, and with mastery. The temple was never just a building. It was always a process, a living sequence of acts, a rhythm of learning, memory, and morality passed from hand to hand across centuries. Every stone laid, every pillar erected, every symbol drawn in wood or stone carried more than aesthetic value. They carried meaning, encoded knowledge that could survive the fall of kingdoms, the burning of libraries, and the scattering of bloodlines. The secret of the temple was never buried beneath rock or hidden in a chest. It was always alive, reenacted in every act of devotion, every ritual, every careful construction. The word returns not as a single object, but as practice. It appears when a mason measures, when a student traces a line in chalk, when an initiate bows before the twin pillars of Boaz and Jachin. Each gesture is an echo of the ark, each symbol a whisper of the lost thunder of the temple. The rituals encode lessons that are timeless. They teach the value of patience, precision, and observation. They teach the power of silence, the ethics of secrecy, and the weight of responsibility. This is why the word matters. It is not a name to be spoken, but a method to be lived. Every lodge, every guild hall, and every cathedral built using sacred geometry is a testament to this process. The rose window, the tracing board, the checkerboard floor, and even the humble apron all serve as carriers of meaning. They remind those who walk through these spaces that they are part of a lineage, a chain of memory that stretches back to Jerusalem, through Europe, and into the modern age. The temple is not lost. It moves, adapts, and survives in the minds and hands of those who respect its principles. Initiation becomes the living reenactment of this knowledge. Each degree, each lesson, each solemn oath is a small resurrection of the original temple. Memory palaces, moral instruction, and symbolic gestures ensure that even if the physical world forgets, the process continues. The word returns through practice, not through discovery. Its power lies in experience, not in ownership. Those who understand the rhythm of the temple carry its legacy quietly, deliberately, and effectively across time. Even modern builders, scholars, and explorers unknowingly participate in the process. They align streets, draw plans, and place stones in ways that echo ancient designs. They participate in the legacy of the temple by following principles of proportion, harmony, and sacred geometry. Each act becomes a repetition of the temple's work, a small piece of the word restored in the world. The word is a river, not a reservoir, flowing through hands, minds, and spaces. And so the secret is never found, because it was never meant to be contained. It is a living tradition, a process reenacted by each person who engages with it in thought or deed. The temple endures not in a single place, but in countless acts of creation, observation, and reflection. Every oath, every line drawn, every build completed, carries the word forward. The word returns each time the process is remembered, honored, and enacted, proving that the greatest secret of all is that the temple lives wherever its lessons are lived, quietly, deliberately, and eternally.